Magic's fantastic and swords are for dorks. Let's unlock the gates of power today. This video gives practical advice on getting the most out of spellcasting in Pathfinder 2e. And I'm wearing my suit today to celebrate this long-awaited video on how to caster good. This has been a planned course in my Pathfinder Law School series, and it's also part of the current series addressing the rebellion in the Pathfinder player base of some players who are unsatisfied with casters. For the record, I don't think spellcasters are weak. They are just as essential to a party, but there is a higher skill floor than for marshals because casters have more options. For this video, I have benefited from the competitive advantage I have with the Rules Lawyer Discord, where we have a concentration of strategically minded nerds. I had a great hour-and-a-half conversation with several members brainstorming ideas for this video, and they also helped me in the preparation process as well. That chat is an exclusive video for people who support my Patreon. I feel like I'm only scratching the surface on playing casters in Pathfinder 2e with this video, and I'm inclined to call this the beginner/intermediate guide. If you have follow-up questions or things you think I should cover in this area, let me know in the comments below. Ronald from the future here, adding something important because it turns out that my videos up to this point have been wrong about something. Someone on Reddit, AAA-Battery03, replied to my recent video saying that actually, if a spellcasting player focuses on doing single target damage, they actually compete with ranged marshals in that specific department. And ranged marshals are the appropriate comparison because these caster builds operate from range, and range does less damage than melee. So the request I've seen from some commenters wishing that there were a way to play a traditional spellcaster, not have to deal with its more complex toolbox nature, and be able to simply focus on blasting, I think this shows it actually already is possible using current options. I'll include a link in the video description, but they have detailed math here, and the point of comparison, interestingly, is at level 5, which is widely seen as a pain point for casters when martial characters become expert in weapons, and casters remain only trained in their spell attacks and DCs. Also, their models go up against a level 7 creature, 2 levels higher than the PC. The builds they present are an elemental sorcerer with the dangerous sorcery feat, and taking the psychic dedication feat, a druid with a Tempest Order, an oscillating wave psychic with Psyburst and Violent Unleash, and an evocation wizard. They are limited by spell slots, however, so they can choose a couple of combats to comfortably do better than a ranged marshal, while keeping up with them the rest of the day. Yes, their average is lower. I assume they're referring to the totality of encounters in a day. However, the casters were significantly less likely to whiff, and the models did not account for their ability to target weaknesses, bypass resistances, target weaker saves, or ignoring or bypassing cover. I'll leave the link for people to look at. On the consistency issue, one might dispute this person's use of a creature 2 levels higher than the PC's. There, the higher chance of failing an attack roll against the creature, I think, will tend to disfavor the marshals. However, the same poster has a, I think, persuasive post from earlier talking about how the meaningful single targets to worry about are those that are higher level than the party. I'll include a link to this as well. Another Redditor, Hunter IV4, lists some other builds, namely the Harm War Priest, Winter Witch, and Fire Oracle, and referring to primal casters generally, this person might also have been taking into account AoE damage by these casters. I'll include a link to this as well. So for casters who want to do well at blasting, these links should be useful. However, keep in mind that at levels lower than 5, the ability to be at peak performance will be less because of fewer spell slots. So in this video, I cover these topics in order. First, casters are good if you know how to use them. What is the strength of casters in Pathfinder 2e? The extra challenge of low-level play, especially for casters in this system. How to choose from the 4 spell traditions. Choosing your spell-choosing method, whether that's being prepared or spontaneous, or using an official archetype for more flexibility, what to think about for your ability scores, what to think about for choosing equipment, general tips for play, general advice on choosing your spells, and finally some good beginner spells. Not necessarily the best spells, some of them are, maybe, but to demonstrate how to think about spells when choosing them. So before going into the nitty-gritty, it's important to think of the strengths of casters from a bird's eye level, and maybe to shed some old assumptions. And so I kind of need to begin with how good casters are in the system. We did an experiment on my server, now almost 2 years ago, where a team of 4 martial characters and a team of 4 caster characters went head to head. They each faced the same set of challenges before fighting each other in an arena. The casters won the head-to-head fight, but I don't think it's because casters are stronger than martials. It was more because of the peculiarity of the experiment itself, and I say more in that video, link in the description. What was clear, however, was that when both teams faced the same white dragon, which was on paper a moderate encounter, they both TPK'd. And it was apparent to everyone that if they had had a combined team of martials and casters, they would have won. Against this white dragon, which had a weakness to fire, the all-martials team had the disadvantage of not being able to trigger that weakness, and they also didn't have a lot of healing, so that once one character was downed, there was a spiraling effect, and they all fell to the dragon. The all-casters team, meanwhile, had buff and debuff effects that would have been strong in a longer fight had they survived it. They had worse defenses, the dragon knocked them out easily. Healing each other and bringing them up from 0 was constantly needed and action-intensive. Meanwhile, no one had enough defense and was hard-hitting enough to draw the attention of the dragon. In actual play, in a cooperative game, it's not a question of which class is stronger than the other in a white room scenario. That experiment proved that both martials and casters are essential and play a vital role in a party. While casters are just as essential as martials in a party, they do have a higher skill floor, for good or ill. And for some players, this enhances the fantasy of being a caster, and for others, it does not. I went more into this in my recent video on why Pathfinder casters must feel quote-unquote weaker, but the takeaway was this. Pathfinder inherited the legacy from D&D of massive spell lists. The sheer number of options, even more than what the Alchemist has, which is also considered a hard-to-master class because of its versatility, means you're able to have more versatility, have the right tool for the job, but it also means having to sift through more options and anticipating the situations each spell is suited for. And that's one of the things this video hopes to do. So what exactly is the strength of casters in Pathfinder 2e? If you come from another system, let's say 3rd edition, 5th edition D&D, or Pathfinder 1st, you may come in, take a damaging cantrip, and fire away round after round. You, after all, only have 2 or 3 spell slots at level 1. You may very well feel that you suck compared to the martials in that case. Well, I would say you don't suck, and there's just something you can do better that you haven't figured out yet. Your strength is in the variety of tools that you have that are particularly good when certain situations arise. And before I give up on cantrips, your cantrips don't do as much as a martial strike, but they are actually pretty awesome for the right situations. Electric Arc is a popular and well-known powerful cantrip. Unlike martials, you can target 2 creatures with your highest accuracy with Electric Arc. And if you fail in your attack, meaning in this case they succeed on their saving throw without critically succeeding, you still do damage. Electric Arc is an excellent spell to mop up low hit point enemies. Similar cantrips are Scatter Scree, targets 2 creatures. Gale Blast and Haunting Hymn do less damage, but they can target more than 2 enemies. That's something martials can't do. Another thing to remember in dealing with the initial stress of trying to play a caster is that you don't win at character creation, which means you also didn't already lose. In other games, you are individual heroes. You can have a strong build, and it will be strong no matter what party you're in. Everyone was an island because a lot of times tactics devolved into reducing enemy hit points to 0 or imposing a save or suck effect that shuts down an enemy. Everyone had their own way of doing so. In previous editions, casters could fill a lot of roles, including the role of the martials, including being a melee monster themselves or summoning something else that is. Pathfinder is more of a team game, not only because there are more ways to synergize what you do with other members of the party, but also because it denies each class the ability to do what other classes can do. With maybe a couple of exceptions, every class needs members of other classes for the party to succeed. And for some very versatile classes, they're still going to have a hard time. Pathfinder is less about optimizing the individual character and more about optimizing the party. making sure that you can cover a number of bases, and finding synergies between some of your abilities and actions. And even if you have a well-made party, what matters more is your decisions in combat than the decisions you made in building your character. And because your in-game decisions matter more, this compounds the complexity for casters. Your decisions matter. So not meeting the, quote, skill floor is going to have worse consequences. And you really feel those consequences in a fight where your party is barely holding on. But it also means that good play will be rewarded. Combat in Pathfinder is not creatures standing in place just doing damage to each other. What makes it interesting tactically is that there's a variety of actions that you can take that are not simply inflicting damage. You can set things up for your allies, or impose status effects. Here's an excellent video I found, I'll have a link in the description, on the importance of status effects making combat more interesting by making decisions more important. In Pathfinder's 3-action economy, the fact that movement costs an action means that simply moving is a tactically interesting decision, because if you move away from an enemy, you tax them an action to move up to you. And if they are a stronger boss creature and you are several relatively weak party members against that boss, you have lost only 1/12 of your party's actions and taxed the monster 1/3 of its actions. This is a tip I got from Knights of Last Call. Without these other ways to impact combat in Pathfinder 2e that are different from just doing damage, or imposing a save or suck spell like Polymorph, then combat devolves into counting down to 0 hit points or ticking off a creature's legendary resistances. This lack of interesting decisions while watching those numbers go down explains why combat can feel like a slog in some other systems. So optimization in Pathfinder can look like this. Let's say we have a barbarian, a level 7 barbarian, a Miri, who's very good at dealing lots of damage. However, her defenses are weaker than a heavily armored fighter with a shield. She can go ahead and run up to that salamander and swing at it with a great pick. She will hit it with a 10 on her d20 roll, and have only a 5% chance of landing a critical hit. And great picks do a huge amount of damage on a critical hit, as we can see. Well, she has other teammates who are later than her in initiative. What she can do is to delay her turn. So that way, the bard can inspire courage, giving her +1 to attacks and damage. The sorcerer can cast fear on that salamander, lowering all of its stats. And the fighter, let's imagine he's wielding a shield, can raise his shield and walk past that salamander, drawing the salamander's attack of opportunity, soak damage with his raised shield, and provide flanking to Amiri, which lowers its armor class by 2. And now Amiri has a 25% chance of landing a critical hit. She has quintupled her chance of doing so. And this is not counting other weapons that have a rider effect on a crit, like weapons that knock a creature prone, or shove an enemy, or make them off guard. Some of them take away an action. That can have their own ripple effect and help the party. And in a tactical game, you don't want to use the same moves over and over. They have their own time and place. You want to use them at the right time. And casters have the most moves to make. This is their blessing and their curse. And it raises what's demanded of the caster player. Here's my list of things of important combat roles that need to be assumed in a party. First, doing consistent single target damage. Consistent, meaning that you can do it all day, not based on a daily resource, and you want to hit them hard. Next is area of effect damage, the ability to affect lots of enemies at once. Taking damage. You want some characters who are tougher that can take the hits and protect the squishier characters. Healing. For obvious reasons. Some enemies have weaknesses. An enemy might be heavily armored, but they might have low reflexes or low resistance to mental attacks. Or maybe they have a weakness to a certain kind of damage, like the White Dragon who had a weakness to fire damage. Buffing allies, applying those positive status effects to members of the party. Debuffing enemies, applying status effects on them. Control, make it harder for the enemy to move through a part of the battlefield, preventing them from taking actions or taxing them in action to get rid of a condition. And reliable effects, and what I mean by this is that things that succeed even on a failure. And if we create 2 columns, one for marshals and one for casters, we see that marshals are very good at consistent single target damage and taking damage, while casters are good at most other things. Now, this is overly simplified, but the bottom line, and I hope I showed this, is that the things you need done in a party, some classes can do better than other classes, and casters have an essential place. But some might say, no, we don't want to simply be a support character. We don't want to simply buff and debuff and heal. We want to kill enemies. Well, my first advice is, first, try it. You might actually like it. It can be kind of awesome, because every +1 matters is one of the sayings in this community. And it feels kind of awesome when that barbarian critically hits because of your bard song, or that ogre misses your healer by an inch because you made them frightened or you gave the cleric some defensive buff. A table should definitely point out those moments, and if a GM is the only one seeing a die roll, point them out as well. When that critical hit lands, it's a shared moment, which is kind of unmatched. And the way that you can create critical hits in Pathfinder, unlike other systems where it's only on a pure dice roll, is pretty unique and pretty cool. Also, healing is really powerful in this game. At low levels, you can restore someone to full or near full hit points who is at 0. The 3-action version lets you heal all living creatures in a 30-foot radius, including yourself, and if there are undead enemies in the area, do damage to them. It's holy fireball, basically. And I have to say that we should also really value support. I think there is a cultural bias against being a support character, when in reality, everybody contributed. From a certain point of view, every character, including that barbarian, is a support character. You wield a different kind of power. And if it helps in your head, think of yourself as a puppeteer, with the marshals in the front being the bodyguards who make it possible for you to control the terms of engagement and tilt the battlefield in the party's favor. Hopefully with some of the concrete tips in this video, you can make more of those moments happen. There are things that you can do that marshals simply can't. You can increase the party's power relative to the enemy's power. You can gravely debilitate an enemy. Some of you have seen this clip already, but I'll play it again. But in my Fist of the Ruby Phoenix campaign, nearly everyone is a martial character except for the bard. And that player was absent that day, so the gunslinger character got to experience casting maze for the first time, which, without a saving throw, removes an enemy from the battlefield. Okay, no save, it's gone, right?
What? Oh, I thought there was
save.
Yeah, it takes checks to get out of the maze. This is one nod to the past of this spell.
That's why it's so strong. Holy cow! Yeah, conspiratorial is out. I'm just. Whoa! Is this what it's like to be a spellcaster?
Now, if your fantasy of being a spellcaster is to do big boom boom and do lots of damage, there are classes that serve that fantasy. The new Kineticist class lets you have elemental impulses that are like spells that you don't have a daily limit on, and many of them are area of effect elemental damage spells. Plus they can do simple blasts that are like weapon strikes that use 1 or 2 actions depending on whether you want to do more damage. And you have a lot of versatility with what damage types you do. However, it does not have access to a full spell list. Another option is the Psychic, which does have a full spell list. It's limited to the occult spell list, but they have focus points that they can spend to cast very powerful amped cantrips. So that's a good blasting option. However, they have 1 less spell slot per spell rank. Lastly, the Magus is a weapon fighting class that can deliver spells through their weapons, inflicting both the weapons damage and also the spells damage. And that can be an at-will cantrip. They cast arcane spells, the subclass that allows them to deliver spells through arrows, Starlit Span, lets you do that from range. Mind you, they have much fewer spell slots than typical spellcasters. This is primarily a guide for spellcasters at low levels. For obvious reasons, it's when most players start playing their spellcaster, but also you want to have a good first experience. And also, low levels are the hardest levels in Pathfinder. This was by design, as was revealed. Here's a clip featuring Mark Seifter, who is one of the co-designers of Pathfinder, who shares what one of the other designers, Jason Bullman, thought about low levels.
Well, the Pathfinder starts off pretty hard, but
Pathfinder starts off deadlier in certain ways. It's very swingy, kind of because Jason Bullman really likes that style of play. He really likes low level to be this dangerous thing.
Yeah.
And to compound that problem, I think there is some element of quadratic wizards going on. It refers to the tendency of magic users in D&D-like games to start off weaker than martial characters, but greater power awaits them at higher levels. So in Pathfinder 2e, you have few spell slots. Your AoE strength has not blossomed yet. You're level 1, and the monsters only go down to level -1, 2 levels below you. So you really won't have those big moments of clearing a room yet, when you start finding monsters 3 or 4 levels below you. Now some would say, who cares about those lower level creatures? They're easy anyway. Well, that's also part of the low level experience. Mark Seifter talked about how actually when you get to mid and higher levels, those enemies that are lower level than the party tend to be tougher than the party was used to from low levels. One big reason has to do with how hit points scale linearly from level -1 up to 20. When your party's at level 8, for example, lower level foes will not have 6 hit points like the goblins you face at level 1. They'll have a lot more. And also they'll crumble to that fireball. We also have D&D's Legacy, where you see a definite power jump when you get to 3rd rank spells and above. I actually prefer this exponential increase in power for casters, but I don't think it's healthy for the game's appeal, especially to do so without any comment in the core rulebook. First impressions matter, and as an advocate of Pathfinder 2e, I would like this community to grow. Now on to the practical advice finally. The most important decision when making your caster character is deciding which magical tradition you want. This helps determine what class you should be. Every spellcasting class is limited to one spell tradition. A lot of spells are part of several traditions at once. But this picture shows where these traditions fall in the greater scheme of things and how they position themselves within what Pathfinder calls the 4 essences. The surrounding circles are the 8 D&D schools of magic, which unfortunately make this picture from the Secrets of Magic book outdated once the remaster comes out. It is a pretty picture. The first tradition, Arcane, is what we associate with wizards. It is positioned between mind and matter. It is a very diverse spell list, and it includes damaging spells, a lot of utility. You're definitely going to find teleport, knock here, debuffing, and it also notably is the tradition that does not have healing per se. Next is divine, which we associate with clerics. It is directly opposed to arcane and is positioned between spirit and life. This is where we find a lot of buffing, support, healing, dealing with the undead, and extraplanar creatures. Occult magic is what we associate with bards and witches, although witches in Pathfinder can use any tradition. Tricking people, affecting their mind, buffing and debuffing, being weird. This is where you see vomit swarm. Undead, ghosts, mysteries, and also they have the soothe spell, which heals. Primal magic we associate with druids. They can do damage with elements, nature-themed spells, and they have the heal spell. Given this, you should then decide what class you want to be, and I do have a video on my channel that explains which classes have which magic traditions. An important part of choosing your class is how your class prepares or learns their spells. To people coming from D&D 5e, 5e is a outlier in D&D's history. For most of D&D's history, you had what's called Vancian spellcasting, where you prepare a certain set of spells in the morning, and once you cast the spell, let's say someone casts Fireball, you cross it off of your spell list for the day. You cannot cast Fireball again. If you want to cast Fireball twice, you have to have had prepared it twice in the morning, and you can prepare different spells every morning. The cleric has access to all common divine spells. The druid has access to all common primal spells. The wizard has access to arcane spells, but needs them in their spellbook first. The witch stores spells in their familiar, and depending on their patron, they can be any of the 4 magic traditions. The magus is like the wizard. They have a spell book and are limited to arcane spells, but they're in parentheses because they have much fewer spell slots. In contrast, there's also spontaneous spellcasting, which is closer to what you have in D&D 5e. They're comparable to a sorcerer in D&D 5e. You have a limited list of spells that you know. You cannot change them from day to day. And when this caster casts Fireball, they simply have one less spell slot from that spell rank. With their last spell slot, they can cast either Fireball or Haste. However, unlike in 5e, you cannot heighten spells automatically. You cannot cast Fear as a 3rd level spell when it affects 5 creatures. But you can't just use one of your 3rd level spell slots to cast Fear. You have to learn it as a 3rd level Fear spell. Same thing with Fireball at 4th level, which does more damage than the 3rd level version, but it's considered a separate spell. The way you get around this is that all spontaneous casters have the ability to have one signature spell in each spell rank. So this caster can make Fear their signature spell, which they can then cast using any of all of their spell slots. They can cast it at 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. One tip, if you have Heal as a 1st rank spell, that's definitely a great spell to make a signature spell, because you will cast that often and want to be able to tailor how strong it is. The Bard has occult spells, the Oracle has divine spells, the Psychic has occult spells, the Sorcerer can be any of the 4 magic traditions, and the Summoner also, depending on which Eidolon they have. By the way, the Sorcerer has more spell slots than any of these casters. It's relatively simple and makes them a good beginner choice. As you can see, each of these ways of choosing spells has its own pros and cons. The prepared casters have more flexibility on what spells they'll have from day to day, whereas the spontaneous casters on any given day have more flexibility on what they'll cast on that day. They each have their own limitations, and as we'll see later in the video, we'll talk about how to mitigate them through equipment. In my opinion, I like how Pathfinder does spellcasting. It means there are more consequences for your decisions, which in my opinion is more interesting. Your mileage may vary, of course. If you're a wizard, there's weight to your decision in the morning of what you prepare that day, and there's weight in that momentary decision of whether you're going to be using your one Fireball for the day. It's less interesting in 5e for me. If you're at 5th level and have about 10 spell slots, you can cast Shield 10 times a day if necessary, and you can decide after somebody hits you whether to increase your AC by 5, while still being able to prepare a whole suite of strong spells, offensive spells like Fireball, control spells like Web, Hypnotic Pattern, which you furthermore can cast several times each if needed. One upside for new players, however, is that it does mean you have fewer things to choose at low level. For some people, that's a plus. They don't like to have to pick 6 spells in the morning and then choose from that full list when they're just learning the game. I would be remiss, though, to not mention that there is 5e style spellcasting in Pathfinder 2e. This is not even a variant rule. It's an official common option available to prepared casters only, however, where you have fewer spell slots because Pathfinder values versatility. At level 1, the only difference you'll feel is that you have 3 cantrips instead of 5. It does mean having fewer spell slots, but that's because you are more powerful having that flexibility to cast any spell you have prepared that day at any rank you choose. Note that in the high levels, you're not limited to 1 spell slot per rank. You're going to get a good number of spells. Some important considerations on ability scores. First, have +4 in your main statistic. Now, some people will dissent in the comments, I'm sure, saying it's all right to have a +3, but we're talking about your first game and having a positive experience. You can't go wrong, obviously, if you have a maximum score in your main attack stat. There are a couple of important exceptions. The Cleric War Priest can build into fighting with weapons, and maybe will not focus on spells that attack an enemy, per se. Things like healing and buffing. The other is the Magus, who can deliver spells with their weapons strike. Another thing is to mind your armor class, and don't sleep on dexterity. Most spellcasters can only wear light armor, if even that, and so that means increasing your armor class requires good dexterity, and every +1 in AC matters. And remember that in Pathfinder, every +1 to your AC can not only prevent a hit, but prevent a critical hit because it prevents them from getting 10 higher than your AC. At level 1, you already get hit points from your ancestry, so that wizard, who is human, will already get 14 hit points. So that means that +1 hit point from a boost in Constitution has less relative impact than in other systems. Now we move on to equipment. One important thing to realize that people won't know automatically is that you don't need a free hand to cast spells, well, most spells. Currently in Pathfinder, you only need to worry about spells that have a material component or focus component. In the remaster, this will be communicated differently. But in my experience, about 95% of spells don't require a free hand. Another thing to bring along is a weapon. I say ranged weapon, I'm assuming you'll be in the back, but some casters, of course, want to get into the thick of things. Attacking with a weapon only takes 1 action, and most of your attack spells require 2 actions. But there's another reason, which I'll get to under general tips. Also, Pathfinder has an assumption that you're spending your money on equipment to empower your character. For martial characters, a lot of their budget goes into improving their weapons. As a caster, you likely are not doing that, and the game assumes that you should be buying scrolls, wands, and staves. And I'm going to add spell hearts, which were added to the game later. These give you more endurance during the adventuring day. You can go longer because you have more spells that you can cast. And they give you more of that vaunted flexibility. And unlike in other editions, these items use your caster's difficulty class, or DC. So every spell you cast on these is going to be at your full accuracy, pretty much. Now let's go through this one at a time. Scrolls. They're cheap. You start with 15 gold at level 1, and you can buy 2 or 3 scrolls with that money. They cost 4 gold each. If you're a spontaneous spellcaster who, remember, you'd be limited to 2 or 3 spells and that's all you can cast, scrolls are invaluable. This gives you the freedom to have the spells you know be limited to spells you will cast often, let's say Magic Missile or Fear. You can fully commit all of your known spells to those while purchasing scrolls that have situational uses, like Comprehend Languages, or Glitter Dust or Fairy Fire, now called Revealing Light in the remaster, to reveal invisible enemies, or Gentle Repose, now called Peaceful Rest, in order to preserve a fallen ally's corpse. Wands are daily rechargeable scrolls. Basically, they have 1 spell each and 1 daily charge. You can also overcharge a wand. You cast the spell again, but there is a 45% chance you destroy it, which you can reroll with a hero point, but again, it's risky. Wands are great for spells that you think you'll cast every day and don't necessarily have to be cast at a high rank. Because they are relatively expensive, a first rank wand costs 60 gold, for example. But this is where you'll want a spell like Longstrider or Tailwind to increase someone's speed. Other spells where it doesn't matter what rank you cast it, Haste, Slow, Sure Strike, and combat spells that scale well, like the Fear spell, which I talk about a little later. Staves are interesting. Some consider them essential. They give you more spell power for the day. Every staff, and here's one example, has a set number of spells on it and at least 1 cantrip. If you cast a ranked spell on it, you spend a number of charges from the staff equal to its rank. The number of charges it has is the highest spell rank that you can cast. So if you're a 9th level wizard, you can cast 5th rank spells. Your staff has 5 charges in the morning. What this means is that, at least for the spells on that staff, you have some degree of spontaneous, flexible spellcasting. So at 3rd level, you can get this staff. And at 3rd level, most casters will have 3 first rank spells and 2 second rank spells. And here, this gives you effectively 2 more spells to cast. Also, your GM might allow personal staves, where you get to choose what spells appear on the staff. However, they do seem to be priced 1 level higher to account for their customization. I'll have a link in the description to the rules for those. Also, spell hearts are permanent items that give you a cantrip and give you some beneficial effect. I'm going to put Jolt Coil up on the screen because it gives you the very popular cantrip Electric Arc. And if you affix it to a weapon, whenever you cast the spell from the spell heart, you get bonus electricity damage to your weapon strikes until the end of your next turn. Another important aspect of equipment for intermediate advanced play, I'll say, is that everything gets cheaper relatively as you level up. Earning income, finding treasure grows exponentially in Pathfinder 2e, so that by the time you're level 10, that 60 gold wand with a rank 1 spell is effectively almost free to you. So if you have access to the True Strike or Sure Strike spell, maybe you always want to have a 4 gold scroll in hand. Staff of Divination is only a 6th level item, and it has True Strike as a first rank spell using only 1 charge. Now we move on to general tips. Get a focus spell. Focus spells can be cast as many times a day as you want, but you can only cast one per battle effectively because you spend a focus point to cast them, and you need 10 minutes to refocus to get that point back. And focus spells tend to be more powerful than your usual cantrips. Some classes get a focus spell automatically, like a Sorcerer. Others need to get a feat, like the Cleric. These are like encounter powers from 4th edition. And if you have many encounters in a day, then yes, you're casting more non-cantrip spells that day. Next is that at low levels, you need to be judicious with your few spell slots. You're going to have 2 or 3 slots at first level. And unlike in previous editions, they're not strictly more powerful than your cantrips, doing a lot more damage, for instance. They have their situational uses. We're going to look at some individual spells later, but here's an example. Ignition, which is a newer version of Produce Flame, is a cantrip that does 2d4 damage on a hit, 2d6 if you're in melee. Breathe Fire uses your spell slot, and it does 2d6 fire damage. Not much more damage. However, if you can hit 3 or 4 enemies with that 15-foot cone, this is definitely a better use of the spell. This is kind of a simple example, but think of your first-rank spells this way. You want to use them at the right time. And many spells are like that. They're okay on their own, but they can be very good in the right situation. Also, this can be a source of stress for new players. If you're a Vancian spellcaster like a wizard and you're a new player and you want a little less pressure on your decisions of what you're preparing that day, there is the flexible spellcaster archetype that I mentioned, but also there is the subclass called the spell substitution thesis, where you can replace any of your prepared spells with another spell from your spellbook with 10 minutes of study. Next, remember my reference to a weapon. Well, weapons in this game, when you make multiple attacks with them, incur the multiple attack penalty. So if you can fire a bow 3 times, but your second attack will be less accurate at -5, and your third attack will be at -10. This is also true with spells that have the attack trait. These are spells that normally involve you making an attack roll. So if you cast Telekinetic Projectile and then fire your bow afterward, your bow is going to have a -5 penalty. The reverse would be true. If you fire with a bow first, your attack spell will have that -5 penalty. But this is not true with a spell like Electric Arc, which calls for a saving throw. So you, unlike a marshal, can cast a spell at your full accuracy and also make an attack probably with a ranged weapon, since it's easier to pull it off from a distance with your weapon. Keep in mind that ranged damage is weaker than melee damage in Pathfinder 2e for good reason. You're not putting yourself in danger from the enemy's stronger melee hitting attacks. And because movement costs an action, you don't have to spend an action to reach the enemy, because dexterity is not added to your damage in Pathfinder. If you have a composite bow, which is a martial weapon, you can add half of your strength bonus, round it down. Next is try to target a weaker defense. Creatures in this game have 4 defenses. Their armor class, which weapons target, and then there are 3 saving throws, which you can target a number of ways. And as a spellcaster, because you have the benefit of a variety of tools, you have the ability to target more than 1 defense. The Recall Knowledge action is very useful, a very common thing GMs do, and I think this is implied in the rules, hopefully we'll get more clarification in the remaster, is allow you to find out the lowest defense of a creature, or at least find out whether a specific defense is weak. You probably have a good intelligence or wisdom for this purpose, and those are the ability scores that you usually recall knowledge with. However, that doesn't need to be done by you, and I think this is something that's forgotten. Sometimes the ranger in the party or somebody else who doesn't know what to do with their action can recall knowledge, which is especially helpful to the spellcasters. So let's take one low enemy foe, the Midflit. Your wizard might be inclined to cast Electric Arc. It's the most powerful offensive cantrip in the game. However, it calls for a reflex save, and reflex happens to be their best defense. Well, that's why you brought Chill Touch and prepared that also. It's a touch spell, but it does target their fortitude save. Not only does it do similar damage in this case, while basically giving you a +5 bonus to your attack, then you're much more likely to do damage, and there's a 25% chance now that they're going to critically fail and get a rider effect. And I'll note, most creatures have a defense that's lower than their armor class, and the Marshal's weapon strikes are limited to targeting their AC. Next, let's talk about attack roll spells. Many attack roll spells do nothing on a miss. In contrast, spells like Electric Arc, which calls for a saving throw, do half damage even when they succeed on their saving throw, so long as it's not a critical success. So attack roll spells are inherently riskier. Consider using the spell True Strike, which is going to be renamed Sure Strike, which is useful in Pathfinder 2 because it only costs one of your 3 actions and lets you roll your attack roll 2 times. The problem with this spell, however, is that it's only available to arcane and occult casters, which I hope the remaster is going to address. If you want to stick to rules as written, you can take an arcane or occult archetype. And basically, when you're setting up for a big spell, let's say casting a high-level disintegrate spell, you want to bend the math as much as possible before you do so for obvious reasons. And it's very likely that you can. For that disintegrate spell or ray of enfeeblement, see if one of your allies can make it off guard, formerly known as flat-footed. You can lower their defenses or become hidden, and I'll go over those actions in a minute. Many of them fall under a category I call third actions. Third actions is a term that's caught on because many spellcasters use 2 of their actions to cast a spell and don't know what to do with the remaining action. Also, for marshals, attacking a third time on your turn is often wildly inaccurate and usually not advised. So you need something to fill in that space somehow. So let's go over some of the many things you can do. Well, first, if you're a bard, the obvious choice is to Inspire Courage, which is a cantrip you get at level 1 that gives everyone on your side +1 to attacks and damage. A hugely powerful cantrip, especially given the fact that your party is likely to make 5, 6, 7 attacks this turn. There are more attack rolls in Pathfinder because of the 3-action economy. Another third action I already mentioned is a Weapon Strike, which can be coupled with your saving throw spell. Stride is a surprising third action. For a touch spell, you need to stride up to something, obviously, but also it's a good defensive move, because if there's an enemy bearing down on you, you can just walk away. Most creatures do not have attack of opportunity. Sometimes you can also step away, moves you 5 feet, without provoking reactions. Sometimes that helps too. You can force that enemy to spend actions to reach you. You can also just move to provide flanking to an ally. Stand on the opposite side of an enemy. You don't need to be wielding a weapon, in fact, in order to provide flanking. To prioritize your survival, raise the shield that you're holding. There is no such thing as shield proficiency. Everyone can use shields in Pathfinder. You can also take the shield cantrip as well. It gives you only a +1 versus a +2 to AC, but it has the ability to soak damage. There's also a general feat that lets you soak damage with the shield. Aid an ally with the guidance cantrip, which can only be used once per hour per target in this game. Or prepare to aid, where you tell your GM how you want to aid somebody else in their upcoming check, and you spend an action to prepare a reaction that you spend to aid. However, rules as written, it's not strong enough at low levels, which is something I house rule. Also, there are many skill actions that you can do that have defined ways to affect combat. You're already, as a caster, going to be good at one of the 3 mental attributes, and since you get 9 attribute boosts at level 1, it's a good idea to boost one of your other attributes. Intelligence means that you can be very good at recalling knowledge. If you're a wisdom caster, there's also skills that you can likely recall knowledge with. Not only good for out-of-combat healing, but you can take a skill feat, Battle Medicine, that only uses 1 action to provide healing, or try to an adjacent ally. Charisma is surprisingly useful to people coming from other systems. You can debuff enemies with Demoralize. The Frightened condition lowers all of their stats, including their defenses and their attack rolls, and their special ability DCs, everything. Also, the Bon Mot skill feat is a way to insult somebody and give them a -2 and possibly -3 penalty to their will defense and to their perception score. It's a very strong setup for your mental attack spells. You can also set up an attack if you plan to do an attack roll with a spell or a weapon. All of these actions can make you hidden to them. You can hide behind cover. You can create a diversion using a deception skill. You can feint in melee using deception. A word on fighting strong enemies. Creatures that are the same level as the party or higher tend to be a rude awakening for people used to other systems. They are truly equal in power to one of your party members or more. In fact, a creature of equal level as one of your party members, probably has higher stats than you do to account for their lack of special abilities and they're not having a balanced party. And in the case of higher level enemies, this is just part of Pathfinder 2e's balance and what makes it a reliable and counterbalancing system. To account for the fact that they don't have 4, 5, or 6 party members, they have to hit as hard as several of you put together. You, however, have the benefit of action economy and the ability to work with your party to swing the math to even the playing field. Also, as a caster, in other systems, fighting a boss usually was the occasion to use your big spells to either damage the enemy or debilitate them severely somehow. But the fact is that that creature will probably succeed in a saving throw against you, or you're going to miss on your attack roll. This too is part of the challenge. In such a situation, you will want to select spells whose effect when you fail is something that you want. And when I say you fail, that usually means that the target succeeds on their saving throw. I'm going to go over some examples in the specific spells at the end, but there are some spells that simply deny one action to the foe that you're going to spend a high rank spell slot on. Do not underestimate the power of that, because remember, you are denying them 1/3 of their actions that round. And oh, how powerful those actions are. The other principle is, I implied this already, is to tilt the math. Mathematically, +1s are actually more impactful against a creature you are not very likely to succeed against. Think about it this way. Let's say for a boss creature you need a 15 to hit them, a very high roll. If we take that example from earlier against a salamander and give an effective +4 to your attack, you've nearly doubled the likelihood that the barbarian will hit them. And you've more than doubled the chances that their follow-up attack, which is less accurate, will hit them. Last general tip is to manipulate initiative. A number of things that you can do expire at the end of an enemy's turn. And so you want to impose that on the enemy right after they've acted. The classic example is the frightened condition. If you cast the fear spell, maybe don't do it right before they act. Maybe delay until after they act, so all your allies get the benefit of trying to hit that frightened enemy. Just know the rules of delay. You cannot use reactions until you jump back into initiative. Your initiative count then becomes where you jump back in. Also, if you have an ally downed by an ogre, maybe don't heal them right now when the ogre's about to act and might knock them out again. Consider the timing of what you do. And this applies to all members of the party, not just casters. It's an often underutilized part of tactics in the game. Now I finally get to what some of you have been waiting for, tips on selecting spells. I'll get to specific spells and comment on those, but first I'll go over some important principles for spell selection. First, when you look at spells, understand that everything has a situation it's most useful for. Even a spell that just does damage does a certain type of damage usually, and also has some additional effect that it does on the enemy. Give yourself spells that allow you to target different defenses. Watch for the incapacitation trait. This is the trait that makes a spell far less effective against higher leveled creatures. This is reserved for spells that incapacitate you, that are really strong. One example is Color Spray, which will probably be renamed Dizzying Colors in the remaster. For a whole minute, it blinds you if you critically fail on your saving throw. The incapacitation trait makes it so that if the target's level is higher than double the spell's rank, so in this case, a level 3 creature or higher, then they treat their degree of success as 1 degree better. You don't want to get blindsided by this trait. This is also where you'll find spells like Blindness and Polymorph. When fighting a higher level foe, like an ogre, a level 3 ogre, and your party's level 1, have the mindset that what you're shooting for is the success effect. Don't let how these spells work make you think that they're only useful in your highest spell rank either. When you're 5th level, for example, this spell, cast as a first rank spell, still works at full power against low level enemies. You also want to include in your arsenal reliable spells. So this means spells that don't call for a roll, which includes obviously buffs to allies, and also magic missile, and spells that have an effect when you fail, aka when they succeed on their saving throw most likely, that have some partial effect as a result of the 4 degrees of success system. This includes Electric Arc. It still does damage when they succeed on their saving throw and don't critically succeed. Scatter Scree is also in this category. Sometimes you want to knock out that enemy that's at low hit points. Another example is the first rank spell Shockwave. It's a 15-foot cone that sends a little local earthquake, and it causes them to fall prone if they fail their saving throw. But even if they succeed on their saving throw, they are flat-footed until the start of the next turn. So manipulate the initiative order so that all your party members can act right after you. Now we get to, well, I've already given a few spells, but more examples of spells. Some of these spells are chosen because they're strong. There is an inequality in usefulness and universality of spells, because it is, after all, a spell list of hundreds of spells. But not only that, I'm going to be using some of these examples to illustrate some of the principles we just went through. I need to give credit where credit is due. In addition to the people on my Discord who helped me, one of them referred me to Gortle's spell guide for the Sorcerer PF2 Remastered, which covers all the magical traditions and has a color coding system and gives brief thoughts on hundreds of spells in the game. I found this an invaluable resource, and I'll include a link in the description. As always, make sure that a given spell is within your magical tradition. Some good go-to cantrips. Detect magic, for obvious reasons. It's a great way to find magic items in the wild, and also general magical phenomena. Figment is going to be in the remaster this fall. It lets you make an illusion of sound or a visual illusion, which looks accurate until they approach within 15 feet. There's a whole variety of uses that you can think up outside of combat for this. And if my reading of the rules is right, you can create an illusion of a wall that can provide cover, an AC bonus, to somebody behind something. Illusions are pretty powerful in Pathfinder 2e. They have to interact with something or do the seek action to try to disbelieve it. And under the GM's discretion, even if disbelieved, it can possibly still provide concealment to those hiding behind it. Then we have some attack cantrips. Of course, Electric Arc is included here. The remaster might make this 2d4 without adding your spellcasting modifier, but it's still going to be the strongest cantrip in the game because it can target 2 creatures. It's just going to be less of an auto pick. And your table could still use the original version too if you want. Then there's Telekinetic Projectile. It does 1d6 plus spellcasting ability modifier. Probably with the remaster, it will do 2d6 and scale better than Electric Arc. We also have the highest damaging cantrip, which just came out in Rage of Elements, called Needle Darts. It does 3d4 piercing damage. It has a great range of 60 feet, and if you critically hit, it does persistent bleeding damage. Also, unlike these others, it's available to every tradition. The disadvantage of these 2 cantrips is that they require attack rolls, and so will do 0 damage on a failure. Ray of Frost is the long-distance cantrip, has a 120-foot range, and is useful to have for that reason. Here are some first rank spells. True Strike, which likely will be renamed Sure Strike with the remaster. It only works on yourself, is useful to buff any attack you make, whether that's a weapon or a spell. You definitely want to do this for those expensive spells that use a high rank spell slot, or for attack rolls that are really needed in the moment. Here's a good spell, Briny Bolt. 60-foot range. You hurl a bolt of salt water from your hand. If you hit, you do 2d6 bludgeoning damage, which is meh, but you blind the creature for a whole round. They have to spend an action to wipe the water from their eyes. But if you can time it so that the rest of the party acts right after you, that enemy is now off guard to all of your party's attacks. Critical success is awesome against a boss creature. It makes them dazzled for a minute. It means that 20% of all of their very scary hits that at low levels likely can knock out a party member will miss. Next is Fear, a strong spell. It does not have the incapacitation trait and is good at all levels. This is one of our reliable spells. Even if they succeed on their saving throw, they're still frightened 1. You want to time this spell right before your allies act. Failure is frightened 2, which the way Pathfinder works, they're going to be frightened 2 for 1 round, and then after their next turn, they're frightened 1. So it basically triples the effect if you think of it in a purely mathematical way. Critical failure is even more stupid. Frightened 3, and they're fleeing for a round. So they waste 2 rounds fleeing and then running back into the battle. If you heighten it to 3rd rank, you can target up to 5 creatures. So this is a very strong spell to consider. Next is Gust of Wind. It is a 60-foot line. Creatures that fail their saving throw are knocked prone. It's particularly strong against flying creatures, who count it as a critical failure instead. This, like the Grease spell, can make a number of enemies prone and vulnerable to your attacks. Prone is a strong condition. they become off guard to all your enemies. If you have an ally like a fighter who has attack of opportunity starting at first level, if that enemy tries to stand up, they give that fighter a free attack. Also, when they're prone, another ally can grapple them on the ground, really pin them down and give them a bad day. They can't even stand up unless they escape from your grapple. This is also notable for targeting fortitude and knocking someone prone. Those who know the game know that the trip action targets their reflex defense. So this is a way to make something resistant to tripping that has fast reflexes, make them fall down. Also, this spell lasts until the start of your next turn. So it's a whole round, basically, where any creature that's large or smaller that moves into the gust must make a saving throw. And even if they succeed on their saving throw, they cannot move against the wind. Even in a 10-foot wide corridor, that large ogre, I keep referring to ogres, would not be able to move up to you. It also has other ancillary effects that have their own situational uses. Next is Heal. This is a superstar spell that Divine and Primal casters have. This spell alone should make the Marshals jealous. And Clerics now get 4 free slots of Heal or Harm after the Remastered comes out. It used to scale with Charisma before. It's the best healing spell in the game. It's versatile. Heal 1d8 hit points times the spell's rank. Add 8 times the spell's rank if you spend 2 actions on it. So a 10th level heal spell will heal 10d8 plus 80 hit points. That's a lot of healing, and you can do it from range. In Pathfinder, healing can outpace damage sometimes. And because knockouts are so punishing, you actually have an incentive to heal somebody who is not knocked out yet in Pathfinder. And then there's a 3-action version, which disperses energy in a 30-foot emanation. Emanations you can choose to include yourself or not. And it simultaneously heals the living and harms the undead, who then have to make a saving throw or take positive damage from you, which will be called vitality damage in the remaster. The 3-action version notably does not get the bonus plus 8 healing per rank, but when you have 1 or more party members who are unconscious, then this is huge. Also, by default, in the rules, when you bring an enemy down to 0 hit points, they die. It's up to the GM to apply the unconscious and dying rules, and so you usually don't have to worry about bringing enemies up from 0. Next is Hydraulic Push. Not only does it do decent damage, 3d6, which doubles on a crit, but it also knocks them back. That in itself might knock them off a cliff. I'm looking at you, Baldur's Gate 3. Or it just moves them away from an ally so that they have to waste an action to move back up to an ally. That in itself could be vital. And also, I keep mentioning taxing an action to an enemy. Higher level boss creatures can hit you 3 times, despite the multiple attack penalty. They're that accurate, so that's the value of that. Here we have Illusory Object. This affects a 20-foot burst, and so you can provide cover to a lot of allies. Enemies have to seek or interact with it in order to have a chance of disbelieving it. It can even animate. So there's just a lot of useful ways outside of combat to use the spell as well. Next is Tailwind, formerly known as a Longstrider. A 10-foot status bonus to your speed is huge. With the 3-action economy, the Barbarian can now walk up to the Ogre, hit it, and then walk 35 feet away. Now the Ogre has to spend 2 actions to walk up to her. For the record, I think this spell is too strong at 1 hour, and the second rank version of 8 hours is ridiculous, but whatever. I house rule it in my games, but if you go by rules as written, here we go. Next is our old standby magic missile, and it's going to be called Force Barrage with the remaster. Its strength, obviously, is that it's so reliable, there's no attack roll needed. It does force damage, which very few things resist. This is particularly good against boss enemies, whereas the marshals in your party will be having trouble hitting something. You basically say nope to armor class. It also has this neato feature where the number of actions you spend on it determines how many missiles are shot. When you become a 5th level character, you get to shoot 2 missiles per action you spend on it, and it scales up from there. Runic Weapon, formerly called Magic Weapon, is a huge boon at level 1. It gives you not only +1 to your attacks, but counts it as a striking weapon, which is a level 4 item that gives you an additional damage die on your weapon. This is very strong at low levels, and in the remaster is going to be available to all magic traditions. You don't want to waste the spell against low-level enemies that don't have a lot of health. If an ally will probably knock out something in one blow, save it for another battle. But yeah, sometimes you want to find yourself in a situation where you cast this on the biggest damaging member of your party, and everybody does everything they can to make sure that character stays on their feet and that they land blows. Then we have a variety of summon spells at rank 1, summon animals, summon fae, animate dead, to bring a creature into being. They almost always use 3 actions and require 1 action to sustain every subsequent round. But whenever you cast it and when you sustain it, this minion, it has the minion trait, has 2 actions. They cannot use reactions, and they cannot cast spells that are of a higher rank than the spell that summoned them. Also, they won't outshine your party members in terms of fighting ability. In fact, they're relatively weak. However, they can find traps for the party, they can provide flanking in a pinch, they can block movement to enemies, they can draw fire, draw their attention, which is often their most important use. These usually don't last very long for that reason, and so when you cast it, be mindful of initiative order, and manipulate it if that would be better. And now we move on to second rank spells, and I obviously cannot go through all of the ranks, and I'm also going to be less detailed as we go up. I'm only going to go up to third rank. Okay, so second rank spells. We have Calm Emotions. This is a very strong debuff spell that divine and occult casters can get. A 10-foot burst that can forcibly calm creatures, and if they fail their saving throw, they cannot use hostile actions. This does have the incapacitation trait, which limits its usefulness against strong foes, but this will divide the enemy, let you focus on those who have not failed their saving throw, making it a strong control spell. Even if they succeed on their saving throw, they get a -1 status penalty to their attack rolls so long as you sustain it, which can be a big deal. If they critically fail, then even hostility doesn't end the effect, so you can keep attacking them and they don't resist. This is clearly a strong spell if it lands. Next is Enlarge. This is a fun spell. It lasts for 5 minutes. It makes a creature in your party large. That's including if they're a tiny pixie. Their reach increases by 5 feet, and they get a bonus to damage. And at a higher rank, you can affect up to 10 creatures. This has a number of uses. The one that jumps to mind is an ally who has the attack of opportunity reaction and a reach weapon. So your fighter with a glaive can become large, and that 10-foot reach weapon now becomes a 15-foot reach weapon, and they can threaten a 40-foot diameter area with their attack of opportunity. It lasts 5 minutes, so pre-buff, or use that large glaive-wielding barbarian to affect a social encounter. Next is Final Sacrifice. Anything with the minion trait, so this is anything you summon. Your familiar, your animal companion, you can kill them immediately and they explode in a 20-foot radius, doing a very high for second rank 66 fire damage. You obviously don't want to do it on your animal companions or familiars, however, because it takes time to replace those. And it's kind of messed up. But things you summon, that skeleton you summoned. One great spell that works with this is Unseen Servant. Because summoning is action intensive, it takes 3 actions. This can be sustained before a combat, and it's invisible, so it won't alert the enemy, and it only costs a first rank spell slot. You can sustain something out of combat up to 10 minutes before you become fatigued and can no longer do so. But if you anticipate a fight coming up within the next 10 minutes, you can cast Unseen Servant, send it off, and Final Sacrifice has a 120-foot range, and start a battle off with a bang. 66 fire damage, by the way, is how much the Fireball spell does at rank 3. Next is Hideous Laughter. This is a very strong debuff spell. It has no incapacitation trait, and even if they succeed, the monster can no longer use reactions so long as you sustain it. This is very good if a creature has attack of opportunity, shield block, any other number of powerful reactions. You're basically denying them an action every turn if they have one. If they fail, they are slowed 1, denying them an action every turn, in addition to denying reactions. Critical failure, they fall prone and do nothing for a round before the rest of the spell kicks in. And I should mention here Roaring Applause, which is like Hideous Laughter +1. It's hilarious, first of all, because you cause them to applaud for you, something that you do, even though you're in the middle of combat. And if they fail their saving throw, not only are they slowed 1 and cannot use reactions, but their applause has the manipulate trait, which provokes reactions like attack of opportunity. You basically can give an ally a free attack every turn with this spell. Next is Illusory Creature, which lets you create an illusory image of a large or smaller creature, and it's not limited by anything but your imagination. It could be a dragon, and you can speak through it. This has obvious out-of-combat uses and could be a way to bluff in the middle of combat as well. It does not have a limitation on its duration beyond how long you can sustain it, so 10 minutes. It has an excellent range. The downside is that if it's ever hit or fails a saving throw, the spell ends. It has your defense scores, by the way. But in the meantime, you can cast it with 2 actions and then sustain it, which gives it 2 immediate actions to act on. You can give it an illusory range strike from a distance. Remember, illusions cannot be disbelieved unless they are directly interacted with, or they use the seek action and successfully beat your spell DC. The illusion, so long as it exists, can do real mental damage to the creature. It can even trigger weaknesses, because they actually believe that, in the case of a white dragon, that that's actual fire that you are shooting from a distance. Whenever the illusory creature goes away, then they still keep half of that illusory damage. The GM needs to track it separately. Not very good as a fighting spell, but very good to distract the enemy. They'll have to spend an action trying to interact with it, at least 1 action. Then we have just a really cool spell called Inner Radiance Torrent. This is one of a handful of spells that you can spend 2 rounds, 6 actions, building up into a big explosion. Here you do a 60-foot line, affecting all creatures with force damage. And if you spend 3 actions, it's 120 feet long. And if you spend 2 rounds of actions, it does more damage, and you enter a shining state for 1 minute, causing you to glow with light and deal force damage to creatures that end their turn next to you. This obviously is just a really cool spell, because it's a 60-foot line. However, the new reposition action coming in the remaster should make it a little easier for your allies to move enemies into the right position. However, a warning, it scales too aggressively. The damage goes up too much as written. And co-designer of Pathfinder 2E, Mark Seifter, said 2 years ago now that this was going to be errated, but it looks like they haven't actually gotten to that on Archives of Nethys. Next is 3rd rank spells, and I'm only going to go over a handful of them and then we'll finish. You all know Fireball, obviously. That's at this rank. Very good spell. Here's Haste. It gives a creature 1 extra action per turn that can only be used to stride or strike. And if that creature was already planning to do one of those things on their turn, this is effectively a 4th action, and it lasts 1 minute. No need to sustain it. So it's a big deal. Also, if it's heightened, if you can get to 13th level, you can target the whole party. But your party can think of other ways to combo this, like 3 action activities like Inner Radiance Torrent earlier. You can aim it much more easily. There are feats like Whirlwind Strike. You can do a bunch of those 3rd actions I went over earlier, and still move or attack, plus cast one of your 2 action spells. If you have the Battle Medicine skill feat, you can cast a spell for 2 actions, walk over to an ally who's downed, who's over there, and then bring them back up. There's just a lot of ways you can leverage this spell. And the last spell I'll show is Slow, because hot damn is this a powerful spell. It does not have incapacitation. Even if they succeed on their saving throw, they lose an action. They're slowed 1. But if they fail, they're slowed 1 for a minute. That is a big deal. If you can land this against a boss creature who has a low fortitude save, you're golden. And if they critically fail, they are slowed 2. In fact, I think this spell is too strong, but since a common complaint is that casters are not strong enough, I've been allowing this as written in my games and also giving it to some enemy NPCs as well. See how they like that. But as you can see, as we get beyond the first couple of levels, even the 1st rank spells had their remarkable uses in certain situations. But we're quickly getting into territory where you're kind of tilting the whole fight. So that's it. I usually don't give advice videos, and I feel like I've only skimmed the surface here on the whole how to play caster subject. Leave a comment, say things that you appreciated, things that you think I should go deeper into. Maybe you have follow-up questions or have suggestions on things I can cover in this area. And my next video in this caster series is going to be how to buff casters in your Pathfinder game. I think casters are at a fine place, but not every table is happy with them, and so I go over some things to try out at your table if your group thinks it's necessary. However, you should try to follow the tips in this video first. Also, my Pathfinder Law School series will continue giving basic overviews for people learning the system, and also highlighting some things that I think are great about Pathfinder 2e. I also have combat demonstrations on my channel that people can learn a lot from, and also a few that are specifically focused on tactics and strategies for combats in Pathfinder. Also, join my Discord if you haven't already, where we talk about Pathfinder 2e and other gaming, and I also interact directly with the community, and we often come up with ideas for future videos. Also, if you haven't yet, join my Patreon. It allows me to continue making this channel, and there's the exclusive chat I had with members of my Discord that thought up of ideas for this video. Our discussion also went in other directions too, related to this topic. So that's it. I have been Ronald the Rules Lawyer. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.